here with Angela Belford, and today is New Year's Eve. Thank you all for listening with us
Woo!
live. We are going to just take a moment and pause and have a little bit of a fun episode. We are going to do a book recap, our year in books, if you will. Now, while we were getting ready for this podcast, we were struggling to narrow down our nonfiction reads. So today we're talking about some of the maybe most impactful nonfiction reads that we had from 2024. We are going to send out an email newsletter after this that's going to include a more holistic list from both of us. So it's not just like our top books, but maybe the books that we don't recommend or different things like that. I don't know if there's any book on your list you wouldn't recommend, but who knows? The ones that aren't maybe didn't meet the top or other ones that we really loved, but we just had to trim for time for this episode. So go to our website, the letter B freakingawesome.com and join our email list if you want to learn more about that. So, without further ado, Angela, would you like to kick us off? What is your first book you want to share about?
My first book is actually the one that is the most recent. I read this
Mm.
over Thanksgiving. I took a little road trip down to Central Arkansas to see some family and was able to finish it on the down and back, which I loved because it was only, 5 hours round trip. And it's called The Energy Bus by John Gordon. And it was a recommendation from a friend of mine. And here's what I love about it for me it was permission to go back to being uber positive in the world. So I feel like, and we talk a lot about sorry.
Okay. Sure. You needed that permission slip. That's right. Don't be a Debbie Downer. You are allowed to be positive, Pam. I don't know.
Sorry. I know people are like, oh dear God. This is you not being positive the last 3 years. But we talk a lot about like when we are in personal growth in an area, we pendulum swing. So right, I pendulum swung where everything was positive. Everything was look at the silver lining. I was definitely guilty of jumping over, acknowledge the pain and
Mhm.
then look for the good. And so I would always just look for the good. And so I ignored the pain. And I found that then that pain just sat there and festered and festered and festered. And then that's what led to, 3 years ago, finally believing my therapist that I had to deal with my grief issues, right? And so wrote a book about that. And so what the energy bus talked about is the idea of like life is going to be hard and what kind of energy do you bring to the room? What kind of energy do you bring to an environment? And it felt like I had kind of put a governor on my positivity and I don't want to like go back to toxic positivity. That's not what I'm trying to do. I still want to be able to acknowledge people's pain and acknowledge my own pain, but really just being okay with being more positive in the world and it really is a better way to be.
For who would you recommend this book? Like, what kind of things would be going on for them that you would recommend that they read this book in particular?
Well, the subtitle is 10 Rules to Fuel Your Life, Work, and Team with Positive Energy. And what I like about the book is if you are somebody who's like, ugh, nonfiction, ugh, I hate nonfiction. This would be a great book for you because it's more of a novel format. It's the allegory story format. And so it just tells the story of this guy that's kind of having a really hard time. George, he has a flat tire and he has to start riding the bus. And so he gets to learn over the 2-week period. And so, if you're one that likes to learn by story instead of reading a chapter one, blah, 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 chapter two, blah, blah, blah. So this would be a good book. If you feel like, man, oh man, I just am dragging, I'm having a hard time um, of just getting through my life, this could be a great book for you.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
thanks.
What's your first book?
So, my first book is actually a book I started in 2023 but finished in 2024, and it is The Making of Biblical Womanhood by Beth Allison Barr. And this book is phenomenal. It is definitely research heavy. It is thick. It is just like meaty kind of book. It's not a charcuterie board. This is steak and potatoes. I loved the historic perspective on unpacking how women have become subjugated in the Christian faith. And I think the subtitle of the book is the ordination of female subjugation in the Christian faith, something like that. How this became holy to push women down. And so she really breaks down there are a lot of thoughts and ideas that people have that this is how it's always been. We've never had female pastors, so why should we have female pastors now? It's actually not true. It's actually only been since the 1900s that we've not had female pastors. And it's actually only been since the Reformation era that uh, married women were was put on this pedestal to get married. Before that, it was actually like the highest achievement was not getting married so that you could pursue your faith and your ministry full time and in a more thorough way. And so I really like how she unpacks these stereotypes. And as somebody who has been often frustrated by the way that women are treated in the church, this book was really good for my heart and my soul and just unpacking all of that. So
But it's not a man hater book,
it's not a man hater book.
and
No.
it's not a leave the Christian church book.
Nope. Nope. It is not. Neither of those things. Um, it is countercultural to a lot of the American Christian church movement, in that there is a focus on, submission and respect that did not like that's not the only ways. That's not the way that Jesus treated women. Let's talk about more of the whole picture. Even the things she has a great chapter on Paul and what Paul has to say about women. And I really appreciated that she basically brings in the historic context and says Paul is actually not making a list of rules for women. Paul is making a political and cultural statement. If I was to say make America peaceful again, you would know that I am making a reference to a current cultural phrase. And in the same way, people at the time knew that Paul was making references to current cultural phrases and putting a spin on them. Without that historic context, we lose that meaning. He was not making a rule or mandate for all time, but was making a commentary on the rules of the time. Anyway, if you wanna learn more about all of that and that history and the unpacking and the nitty-gritty details of it, now keep in mind it is nitty-gritty details, so if you're, new to nonfiction, it might take you give yourself space and time to take a long while with this book, and that's okay to have a chapter, really digest it, chew on it, let it sit for a while. You don't have to finish it really, really quickly, which is why I started in 23 and finished in 24. So that's my first book that really impacted me and I'm going to be carrying with me for a very, very long time.
I love it. I would say that I'm actually, from what I started the episode, what I thought I was going to make my second one, I'm going to change it because I'm going to develop a little theme here. One that is going to stay with me for a while is by Ryan Holiday, and it is called The Obstacle is the Way. And the reason why it makes me laugh to make this my second book is because it is essentially a study of Stoicism. And I would say that if I were to summarize Stoicism, it's like whatever will be, will be. It is what it is. Life is going to happen, and we're going to make the best of it. And so it sounds the opposite of positivity. Stoicism sounds completely opposite, and people that are very stoic are typically not known for their effervescent bubbliness, right? But there is an underlyingness to it that is very much like I heard a talk earlier this season. You know, it's been a hard political year for many of us, and I heard a talk that talked about the idea of like looking above. the current circumstances. And this was a faith perspective. And it was like you not staying so in the nitty gritty. And then recently heard it talking about somebody who was in their 70s now. And they were like, I can look back over the quilts and the pattern of my life, and I can see the patterns that it all works out the way it's supposed to, even when I make mistakes, even when things happen, which is a very stoic way to be. And so I am going to say the second book that I would love for people to read is The Obstacle is the Way. Now, he quotes Marcus Aurelius so much in that book. And I tried so hard. I tried so hard to download meditations and to dive in because so many of the great thinkers of our time and throughout time have studied Marcus Aurelius, the original Stoic. Maybe not the original Stoic, but one of the most famous. He wrote stuff and I couldn't get through it. So Ryan Holiday does The Obstacle is a Way. It is a much more approachable. So if the energy bus feels too positive for you and you still need some encouragement, I would encourage you to The Obstacle is the Way.
I love it.
Mhm.
For me, my next book, interesting, yours is about stoicism. Mine is called There's No Cure for Being Human by Kate Bowler.
Yeah. Oh, I loved that book.
Oh my gosh.
Oh,
So,
I
to
loved that book. That was a
give
23 book for me.
to give a little bit of context, Kate Bowler was diagnosed with cancer and then wrote this book just sort of about her journey afterwards. And I think it was No Cure for Being Human and Other Truths I Needed to Hear. There is this is a book that made me cry multiple times. It was a cathartic release for me. It was such good reminders. Angela, we've talked about at different times, particularly last year, you walked through the dying process with a lot of people. And then there's been a lot of grief around that. But you it can help give you that perspective on what really matters, what
Yeah.
is really the point of things without necessarily having to walk with somebody that closely and that intimately. One quote in particular that I really loved that has stayed with me is, our lives are not problems to be solved. We can have
Mm.
meaning and beauty and love and nothing even close to resolution. And I think that that right there
Love
is really, counter hustle culture and productivity and all the things. Our lives are not problems to be solved. They're meant to be experienced and to be
it.
enjoyed.
Mm.
And anyway, this book was really impactful to me. I got to read it in a weekend away when I went to a training. And so it was just me on my own in a hotel room and this training that I went to. And so I think that also is why it will stay with me, is just the where I was when I read it and all of the things. So I really love that. Kate Bowler, No Cure for Being Human.
I'm so happy that you introduced and segued me into the next book on my list, which is Slow Productivity by Cal Newport.
Mm.
I have been a Cal Newport fan for probably over a decade. And whenever he released, oh, more than that, because he released Deep Work in 2011. And ironically, last year someone was telling me about, what an impact that had made, and I was like, "Oh, I feel like I've read that." And as I looked at my Audible, I had read it, and then I saw that Cal had put out Slow Productivity, and the idea of it is that when we want to do very meaningful work, it is not fast. It is we in we say around here a lot, it takes years and years and years to be an overnight success, right? Like Willie Nelson was in Nashville 25 years when he became an overnight success. And so slow productivity talks about the idea of allowing yourself time. And he and Charles Duhigg, both of them have some great, I like their style where they tell a big in-depth story and then they'll put the research and then they'll weave the story back through. And it really encouraged me on my idea with like some of the books that I've read and really recognizing like the next new work that I will produce. I have to go through a healing journey before I can produce that work. So even though I know what that work is and I'm starting the research of that work, I'm I'm not ready because I want it to just it's going to unfold at the rate it's supposed to. I also feel like that I have a ton of friends that are over 70 since I'm 51 and I have just joy and benefit of getting to hear life's lessons from them and see how I can make changes. And I think a lot of times when I'm like, "Ah, I didn't get it done," I go, "Well, when you're 70, will that matter?" Well, when you're
Mm.
70, it will matter that you wrote some books and that people are still reading them and that you're still growing and that you're still learning. That's what will matter, the experiences that you've had. So, anyway, Slow Productivity by Cal Newport. And if you haven't read his other stuff, Digital Minimalism, Deep Work is really impactful stuff. So, love me some Cal Newport.
I love it. I am cheating for my next one, and I have an author who I read 2 of their books this year, so I'm gonna cheat and share both of them. Jonathan Haidt, who wrote The Righteous Mind and The Anxious Generation, which I know The Anxious
Mm,
Generation is a little bit all the rage right now, is New York Times #1 bestseller for several weeks, and it stayed on the bestseller list for, I think, several months. Um, Jonathan Haidt is an interesting fella, I will be honest, and his writing style can be sometimes difficult to get through. And I think that the reason why it's difficult to get through is because he really cares about the integrity of the research and the integrity of his conclusions that he is making. I can appreciate the benefit of that while also saying, I trust you, Jonathan. You don't have to break all of this down for me. I believe you. Um, he does a very good job of breaking down the nitty-gritty of how we get to this conclusion, how we get from point A to point B. The Righteous Mind, subtitle is Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion, is really
mm,
interesting, and it talks about how we form our morals, where do they come from, what impacts our morals and our beliefs. And I think for me, especially in as political of a year as 2024 has been, I continue to find myself in the rare spot of wanting to bridge gaps between Republicans and Democrats. And I want to be a person who can have conversations with everybody. And interestingly enough, not everybody wants to have conversations with everybody. And I'm routinely and regularly shocked by that. And I guess I should stop becoming surprised by it. But I want to. I want to engage people no matter what their political beliefs are, and I know for some that that's really difficult because they say, "Well, this belief is too offensive, this is too out there, this is too frustrating. I don't even wanna have a conversation about it," which is fine. If your goal is to change people's minds, it's pretty ineffective to not actually have a conversation with somebody to and attempt to change their mind. So, the book The Righteous Mind really unpacks and breaks down that there are good people who are both Republicans and Democrats, who are of all religions and who are in everywhere. And as controversial as a thing as that is to say, everybody there I don't believe that there are very many people out there who are just purely evil and who have these beliefs because of some evil thing. And so somebody who feels very strongly in a different way than you probably thinks that they are justified and right in believing that. If you can tap into that and understand their reasoning, you actually have a much better chance of having a good conversation. So, the Righteous Mind unpacks that. Did you have a thought?
I do have a thought. And I just, as you're saying that, I think of, I have a very dear multi-decade long friend, and he is Jewish, and he has enriched my life because of getting to know him. And when Lexi was probably 18 months, 2 years old, so 20 years ago, I felt very convicted that God said, "They will know you're Christians by your love, not by you making fun of their religion and their lack of knowledge of their religion." Because that was kind of where I was at. Was I actually felt like I knew more about the Jewish faith, and will probably always know more about the Jewish faith in some ways because I'm just interested in it. So I read the Jewish Book of Why cover to cover, and things like that. I have gone with him to Passover. I've gone to his friends at the synagogue are like, "You cannot bring the Christian girl back. She cried during Passover." They're all bored during Passover, right? I've participated in bar and bat mitzvahs and the naming ceremony of kids, and anyway, so it is just like it is the greatest joy, and that's one person, and then that has created such beautiful friendships that I have with other people of all faiths. Like I just absolutely feel like my life is so rich from knowing people of multiple faiths and considering them very, very dear friends. And I, like you, I know, considering I definitely have friends on both sides of the aisle, and I'm like, no, I know all the good that's in them. So I love that.
Yeah.
Which leads me,
Wait, no, hold on. I was
nope.
cheating. And so the second book that Jonathan Haidt wrote, sorry, cutting you off, was The Anxious Generation. And this one was also really, really impactful. And I know a lot of people have been talking about it, but I appreciate the way that Jonathan starts out the book and he talks about how he actually set out to write a book about how social media has impacted politics, and in the process stumbled on other research about how social media and this digital age has really impacted the anxiety of children and teenagers and now adults. And he basically was like, this book is so important that I had to set aside the work I was trying to do about social media and politics because this message really needed to get out there. And so he spends 75% of the book telling you what the problem is, making you really depressed, and then 25% of the book saying, here's what we can do about it. So I do really appreciate that. Don't give up. And the 75%, stick in until the end.
Well, also, so that you guys get a clue about Sammy, she listens to audiobooks on 1.7 speed.
That's
And
inaccurate.
so,
That's actually inaccurate. It's 2.5.
mm,
I'm
yeah,
a genuine crazy person. 2.5.
yes,
Can I explain why? Do you explaining why? No? What do you
go for
what
it.
what point are you trying to make?
I just was going to say, so if those of you that don't listen at 1.75 or 2.5, on your speed on your reader, what I was going to tell you is that you might try that technique to get through some of that dry stuff. That's why how she was able to get through the dry stuff and the drier stuff. Now I have the upside of, I actually, we are both members of Sharon McMahon's book club, and I got
Mhm.
to hear him talk about this book live and be part of the Q&A and everything, and it was fascinating. And I will tell you the stat that stuck with me. I didn't read the book. I just went to the book talk, listened to the author talk about the book, and listened to you talk about it extensively. But the thing that stuck with me is they are seeing this bizarre trend in a lack of 20 something male entrepreneurs. And there's two parts to that. Number one, I'm like, come on, girls, let's go. Because there's actually more girls in college. There's more girls doing lots of things, which is cool, women. But it's also detrimental in very bizarre ways. It's interesting that Mark Zuckerberg is a little bit concerned about this because he's kind of helped create this situation. But I found that super fascinating that they are spending more time on video games, and this anxiety is making them so much more risk averse. And he classified it not only as a danger to capitalism because we do not have entrepreneurs solving hard problems, but also a danger to democracy, because we are, if you are afraid to question authority and you're afraid to question power and you are not willing to fight for social change because you are so anxious, then that could be very detrimental in the years to come from a democratic perspective. Yeah, like, dictatorships are rising. That's crazy to me in this day and time. Like, how is that possible? We have education, we should know better, and yet there's actually some cause and effect. And so those were two kind of stats that he shared that really, like, have resonated, and I've shared again.
Yeah. Well, and just so that you're aware, those aren't things he talks about in the book, but follow Jonathan Haidt because he's talking about that. And I
Oh,
think that will actually be us like he that's different than the point of this book, but his work and his research. Hence why I cheated to talk about Jonathan Haidt as holistically for this year. There you go.
you got it here. Yeah, and apparently you don't get that from the book. So there you go.
No,
Bonus.
you can also the 2.5 listening speed. I do that because it helps with my ADHD. That if I actually push my listening speed to the edge of comprehension, it forces my brain to pay 100% attention to the book. Because if I'm at like 80% of my attention maintained, then the 20% will try to fill itself with other thoughts and the grocery list and what am I doing tomorrow? And then what am I doing? And then I've missed the book. I suddenly got distracted. So by pushing my speed to the very edge of its limits, I usually am between 2 and 2.5. That's where I find myself in a really comfy range. But on all of these books, I want to reassure you, if you're listening to us right now, these are books that we have listened to, books we've read on e-readers, and some of them books that we've read paper copies of. So, however you consume book knowledge is acceptable. Read, listen, all of it is a good way to consider reading a book. Somebody once said listening to audiobooks doesn't count as reading a book, and I'm here to tell you they are wrong. It absolutely does.
It
So,
counts.
read those audiobooks. Crush it.
My book is by Scott Shagoyka, and it is called Seek: How Curiosity Can Transform Your Life and Change the World. And what I absolutely adore about this book is that he went out and wanted to understand people that were very different from him. And so he, I believe he's from a school in California, and he has whatever, pick whatever demographic. He went and he packed all of his stuff into a storage unit. He got his research grant and he went into a van and he traveled across country to find people that were absolutely the opposite of him, going so far as to go to several Trump rallies, which was the opposite political view of him, to visit with people, talk to them in line, also leave the rally and be treated poorly by people that actually did align with him, that were protesting that rally, and they were yelling things at him, and he's like, "You don't know me, because I'm actually here bringing my curiosity, and you guys are saying horrible things. And
Mm.
I'm just telling you, I agree with you and I feel bad. I'm never going to see your side." And so he has such beautiful examples, and he really walked the walk of how to explore curiosity, and he wandered the country finding people that were so very different than him, and I just loved the book. And I'm gonna a little bit cheat because I read it because my friend Denise Hamilton, who she's been on the podcast, we didn't talk about her book Indivisible on the podcast. We had Denise Hamilton talking about working with her daughter, but she recommended it one weekend and said, "This is what I'm reading this weekend, my friend Scott's book." And so that's how I got uh, to hear about it and loved it. Absolutely adored it.
I love that so, so much. And so we want to finish our episode and sort of wrap up our conversation about books, actually, with a little giveaway. We are going to share a form. We would love to hear from you guys. What are your favorite episodes? And we'll leave a little space if you guys have feedback for thoughts on future episodes, but really want to hear what is it that you love about Be Freaking Awesome. We're going to put that form out there. We'll be promoting it throughout the month of January. Share that with yourself and with your friends, whoever you want to. And we're
Share
going to
with yourself.
share it with yourself. Yes, take the time, add it to your to do list, do whatever you're going to do. And we're going to give away a book bundle. It'll include both of Angela's books and a couple of books from our previous podcast guests, maybe some things we've talked about today. And we're so excited to just get to take a moment and share what we're reading. I think that we're going to start making this a more regular segment, not once a year, because we had way too many books to cover. We had a
Well,
lot of
and
books that we didn't talk about.
I skipped over the books where we had authors that were on the podcast, and we had a whole episode on Sharon McMahon's new book, and so I
Right?
skipped those because I was like, I feel like I've shared with everybody what I loved about those,
Right.
especially our month on fun.
Yes, Gary Ware, Mike Rucker, all of those books. Great, great recommendations for you guys to read. And we'd love to hear what other recommendations you have for us. Are there books you want us to unpack more? Things you want to hear from the authors? And so we'll go reach out and get their authors on the podcast, do different things like that. Share that in the survey that you're going to go fill out so you can be entered into the giveaway. Until next time, we hope you guys have a great end of your year, great start of your year. We hope you guys go be freaking awesome.